Welcome to Go Into Production. I'm David Diriff, and I'm joined by Wael Rabadi. If you're a VP of engineering or technical leader, then this show is for you. We're here to talk about the real challenges of shipping software at scale, the kind of problems you face when you have multiple teams, complex systems, and business pressure to move fast. This isn't about the latest programming framework or cloud platform or AI hype. It's about the hard, practical work of taking code to production reliably, efficiently, and without burning out your teams. We'll cover everything from platform engineering and delivery practices to team organization and the human side of technology decisions. Today, Wael and I are diving into what we call the platform multiplication problem. If you've ever made the mistake of taking a step back and discovered your teams are running 5 different cloud accounts, maybe 3 different CI/CD tools, and multiple ways to solve the exact same problems well, you know exactly what the platform multiplication problem is. This isn't any one person's fault. It can easily happen to smart teams with good intentions. But here's the spoiler. This isn't really a technical problem. It's an organizational one. And if you don't address the root cause, you'll keep paying the same infrastructure 5 times over. So Wael, let's talk about the obvious question here. What makes good teams create such a mess?
Really good question. Let's start there. So the multiplication problem, it's really about you're trying to achieve something, right? You have a business goal. There's initiatives. Those initiatives are trying to drive you into a deliverable. You have expectations. Business has a budget. They're funding a project, but they're not infinite in their budget, amounts. So what that means is we got to figure out a certain time frame that makes sense for business to deliver a certain outcome. Now, when you think about it from that perspective, if I'm a VP of product or even VP of engineering, my job now is to figure out what are my blockers. So what do I do? Naturally, I'm going to come in and say, all right, I'm going to shield my team, remove blockers, and allow them to move fast.
Right.
So what's the side effect of that?
You're going to have your way of doing it, right? And those blockers are not going to let you see what others are doing.
Well, not only that, you're trying to shield yourself from everybody else's, from a dependency perspective.
Right.
So how do you shield yourself from dependency? You say, okay, here's my goal, here's my deliverable, but what I want to do is remove my blockers, and what that ends up being is a multiplication problem.
Right.
What are we multiplying? I depend on DevOps, for example. So what are my dependencies on DevOps?
Right.
That gets us into I need infrastructure, I need engineers, I need a platform. Now, if I look around and I say, well, I don't want to be tied to somebody else's platform, because if they go down, if they're not being responsive, they don't have the resources, right? We talk about people, we talk about time.
Right.
They're not available. What ends up happening? Then you say, I'm going to cut myself off of that, create my own destiny, which means I need my own DevOps, my own infrastructure. And if you think about it from an AWS perspective, I need my own
multiplication
VPC.
begins. Yes.
And now multiply that by how many business line of businesses, how many VPs in the organization. Now you see your multiplication problem.
But the thing is, like, you're not really, you can't point your finger at someone and say, like, you're doing a bad job or you chose poorly. When I see these multiplication issues, or, you see this, it's so common to see this, multiple doing the exact same thing, in multiple different accounts and all that. Typically, what it comes back to is the organization has created, maybe indirectly, silos. Right? And they've segmented and said, your line of business is your line of business. Do what you need to do to go. your line of business, line of business B or whatever is over here, and that, do what you need to do to go. But the thing is, it's all the same business, right? So organizationally, the business has split these things up and forced you into these multiplication problems. But everybody's running under the same name.
That's correct. Part of it is tooling. Part of it is the concept of platform. Now, we're still, although there's so many options and ideas and things in the market, we're actually still very immature in our tooling capabilities when you really think about it from that perspective. So what ends up happening is our platforms are not really designed to be products. Think about it. We've gone through the evolution of platforms. We've gone through the concepts of Jenkins and being able to set up some kind of pipelines and automating those pipelines. But when you look at the work behind them, they've always been very specific to a particular problem.
So are platforms to you, is it a cloud? Is a platform, maybe Jenkins or some sort of CI/CD tool, or is it Kubernetes, or, help me understand like the breadth of platform.
In software engineering, I think one of the problems that we have, we tend to overload terms. So when we talk about platforms, well, cloud is a platform, and we treat it as a platform.
Right.
But you go to AWS, AWS is really an a la carte platform, if you will. It's a cloud platform. It provides you infrastructure as code kind of thinking.
Right.
It provides you certain capabilities, like I could stand up a virtual machine. I could stand up Kubernetes. I could stand up some, routing.
AZs and
AZs,
all that,
right?
yeah.
But is that really what we're trying to get at when we say platform is a product? Yeah, you could kind of argue it is. But let's go back to the multiplication problem. When you think about what's happening with most of the organizations, these are tools. See, these platforms, we call them platforms, but they're technically a la carte tools. So for me to build my platform, I need to make decisions. Am I going to run a virtual machine? Am I going to run Kubernetes? What's my pipeline going to look like? What is my security chain going to look like? We called it secure supply chain, for example. What is that going to look like? Well, when you really think about it, AWS doesn't give you that. Neither does GitHub. Neither does
They give you
Azure.
the tools, but you got to orchestrate everything.
That's exactly the heart of the problem, right?
Right.
So a lot of organizations, when you go in, what are they doing when they do the multiplication problem? They say, okay, my DevOps are going to come in and orchestrate what these tools are going to, how they're going to compose together, how they're going to come together.
Right.
So now what I did is I build what you could kind of say, I build my platform on top of the cloud, just how you want to really say it.
Yeah.
So the cloud is not really per se the platform that we're defining it to be. Mm. It's not my, I'm going to say supply chain, or it's not my software delivery pipeline. It's just capabilities
enables you to do all
that
these
enables
things,
me to do this, right? So this is where I think a lot of the organizations have not really figured out one way to do it.
I think authentication, login, right? This is a really good example of it, because no matter what, you're not, in terms of user experience, you're not going to want someone to have to log in 4 different times for 4 different products that are made by the same company. Right? You want to log in one time. I think this is classic because no one sat back and said, okay, we need to create a login that is federated for the organization. Right? One login, right? And it's owned by this team. All the other products, you don't do login at all. You don't even get access to the user's table. Like, you don't do login at all. Here's the spec. Here's what we need to give it. Here's, you know what I'm saying? And I think that's a classic case of where each team is going to figure out how to do login and how to do authentication, much less authorization, but authentication themselves.
That's actually a really good example that you're pointing out there. It sounds simple, right? But let's look at it how it becomes a multiplication problem. There's the concept of environments. in your software development pipeline. So I'm working in a dev environment, which then needs to go to staging, which then needs to go production.
Right.
Very simple. Let's keep it simple. I know there could be multiplications of those environments, like Dev 1, Dev 2, Dev 10.
You can justify some of that, though, right?
You probably
Promoting
can.
code between environments, there's justification there.
There is. Now, think about it from this perspective, though. So that simple example of login. So we could say theoretically, the idea is we want, say, a federated login capability. The thing that we tend to shortcome in our process is that it becomes gated. So if you want something federated, then we automatically say we want to govern it. The moment you say you want to govern it, that also leads to, oh, you're a blocker. Or I'm stepping on somebody's toes. Or I can't have this, or I can't have that. And I have a list of things I need to go through before I even get my login capabilities going, before I get my development team going. So when you think about it, as a VP, if I knew my company wasn't doing a good job at, for example, managing logins, I'm going to tell my team, hey, just go stand up, keycloak, and
you're so close to you're on the edge of toil, and that is the developer kryptonite. Right. Toil. Okay, so let's talk about understanding the multiplication issue, right? And how it might come about. What are the real costs behind it? Like in terms of infrastructure, in terms of toil for engineers, developer fatigue, stuff like that. Like what's the real cost here? And real cost, I'm not thinking about monetarily. Well, I am thinking about monetarily, but I'm also thinking about the intangible part of it too, because that affects the project.
It does. It affects your timelines. So the obvious one is the monetary one. We're paying twice, 3, 5,
so
whatever,
many instances per hour times whatever.
So if you're a CFO of a company, you're looking at this bill, you got a high operational cost associated to your development process, right? That comes down to VPs and really engineering to say, fix it. But we can't. So it's not an easy problem to solve.
We got to cut our cloud spend.
Yeah. So I know a funny story about that. We got to cut our cloud spend. I've been through many acquisitions, just kind of like the companies I've been with. And the last company actually had an interesting take. They said, we're going to just turn off all cloud across all line of businesses. And we're only going to go through kind of like a centralized way of requesting access. And then they removed all of that from a development team to the platform team. So now I have a hub to go through in order for me to get to
the stinks of toil, the stinks of ticketing.
Well, the thing is if I'm a VP, that tells me that it might take me a few months before I get an environment.
Yeah.
That's really what it means, right? Or my developing team have to get creative in their local environments because we know we can't get to a development environment. Like, for example, I'm running on Kubernetes. I need certain resources on Kubernetes. Well, we're not going to have that because we have to go through platform. Platform may or may not have sophistication on how to provide you that. But that was one way the funny story around that was by just doing that, it sounds good. I reduced my cost because I overnight turned everything off. But then what does that do to the toil?
I want to come back here because you're on the edge of Conway's Law here, right? But I want to come back to that in a minute because that's the thing is these are good developers, right? And they mean the best. And you're employed. You want to do a good job, keep employment.
Right.
But you're being forced by the organization to make poor decisions. Inevitably, this is going to always point back to security, right? It always points back to security, right? When you start making these decisions. And that's like the real cost of multiplication. It always, in my mind, goes uphill to leadership. The more organized and the more focused they are about, this is the direction that we're going. This is what we want to do. This is how we want the product to be offered into the market, even after acquiring other companies and saying they're going to be a part of our tool set, they're going to be a part of our, like, I'm not going to give you the out there. You need to figure that out before you bring it in.
Right.
Because you doing that and creating an organized way and just having focus in your own mind is going to come back to the business, right? And the other teams. So let's not go to Conway's Law because we're right on the edge of that. But the developer fatigue and really the business impact, because, okay, so they took the ability to spin up anything in the cloud and they put a bottleneck, a purposeful bottleneck on it, and said, you have to go to this form, fill out this form, and that's the only way you're going to do it. And you've got 100 different developer teams that now have to fill out this form that goes to one person's inbox.
Right. Right.
And so, you know, the bad things just start happening and falling.
Maybe a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's kind of relevant here. Think about a queue. So let's take it a little bit back to computer science a little bit. So I have I have a message broker, I have queues and things like that. What's the first problem that you end up facing with a queue? It's throughput.
Right.
Right. So what ends up happening is, how do you solve throughput? Now I have to partition. Now I have to create priority queues. Now I have to make sure there's ordering involved, right? There's so many more complications that happen the moment you put a queue in the mix. And Lean Sigma, they talk about removing waste. Removing waste, actually, very interestingly, comes back to queuing. So what they do as a first basic primitive way of figuring out waste is there steps in the process that's creating a queue, waiting on somebody else, like the handoffs, waiting on somebody else to pick them up.
Right.
So when you put a step in the middle, that becomes a queue, like the one person that needs to receive that request.
We would call that a bottleneck, yes.
It's a bottleneck, right? So your queue then either has to figure out how to be efficient and process quickly, or they need to figure out how to partition at that point. But then you're just creating more bottlenecks.
And you know, I would say almost 10 times out of 10, leadership isn't thinking that far ahead, right?
No.
All they say is, we're going to go to this place. We're going to let them decide who is going to get an account, right?
Right.
And, it's going to take them a while. That's okay, right? That's okay.
Right.
And the conversation stops there, and nobody thinks about it. Leadership pats themselves on the back and said, we cut cloud costs. Good for us.
Exactly. Or the reverse happens. You just say, here's your VPC account.
Yeah, well, and
Right.
just go for it.
So, like, in theory, they all sound good, but it's not in practice, we realize that it doesn't really solve the problem.
And even like your comment about here's a VPC. So like, I know that AWS, and I'm sure all the clouds do, I've just seen it on AWS, have the ability to put a budget on a VPC, right? Or on an account, and say you can't go over that spend. Call it monthly, right? You can only spend, let's say, $200 a month, right? So the developers work within $200 a month to get their product or their feature or whatever working, right? And you're going to get to bad decisions, poor security, real quick, right?
Of course.
Because but that's the environment that they were given. Those are the parameters that they were told to work within.
Right.
That's going to make it to production.
So this goes back to the same, I'm going to bring you back to this kind of correlation, if you will. You can correlate this to business coming in and saying, hey, we have this initiative. I want it done by October. So what ends up happening when you do that? So talking about it from a business speak. We're going to say, well, I can deliver it by October. We got to cut scope, right? So this is no different. So the moment you give me a budget of 200, or the moment you give me any kind of constraint, it turns into, what can I cut?
Right.
And what usually goes, I guess, to the waistline? Logging, auditing, security, testing.
Right.
So now I'm affecting my security and my quality because I'm constrained within a budget.
But I mean, you have to You definitely have to balance that. Like, let's be clear that
Right.
you are running a for-profit business, right? You have to know what your costs are going to be to bring this feature in,
Right.
right? There is a balance there,
There is.
right? So let's get into Conway's Law, because this is going to be fun, right?
Let's do it.
And so first, if you don't mind, give me your just kind of general impression of what Conway's Law is.
Yeah. So really, Conway's Law focuses on from a software development perspective. So if I'm building a software, the result of the software is going to be heavily impacted by the way the teams are organized. So what that turns into in practice, my silos or my let's put it this way, my silos and my boundaries are integration points. So what that means is, like, if I had two different teams working on two sides of a business problem, those teams are going to operate atomically in isolation.
Right.
But a business doesn't work that way. A business says, I have team A and team B, and they both are contributing.
But they both share the same login.
Exactly. There's a problem. So what you end up with, we end up having to solve in Conway's world is that how my teams are organized are going to shape the software that I deliver. Also, what it means is going to shape the user experience that I deliver. So I'll give you like an extreme example of that. So an extreme example of that, it becomes where, if you notice, say, for example, at one time when you log into a website and you start to see you have to log in multiple times because you navigated to different areas.
Microsoft.
Exactly. What does that tell you? That's Conway's Law. There's an integration problem. We didn't solve the integration problem. So what's the fastest, quickest way to get to market? Just have them log in again. What's the problem?
Those OAuth handshakes.
Right.
But just one after another. And it's like, how many times are you going to redirect me?
Now, so you take that back and you say, was that Conway's Law? Or was that part of the design? I argue it was Conway's Law.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, I mean, and again, like, I understand, I don't mean to point my finger, at Microsoft. I'm sorry that they are the first one that comes to mind. When I log into something and I get redirected 15 times, that is the first name that comes to mind. Right? And it's again, like, the business, it has to be thinking ahead. It's got to stay ahead of development. And for a large organization like Microsoft, that is near impossible, right? Because teams and, I mean, the hands-on keyboard folks, the individual contributors of the code, the designers of the code, the architects, or the designers of the UX, the architects of the systems, and they're so disconnected. Right. But still, from above, like, this is the experience you end up, because in human terms, think about it. I bet if I went into Microsoft and said, could we please have the person that owns authentication for Xbox, authentication for Microsoft.com, sorry, Microsoft, authentication for Azure, right? Could we put them in the same room? And if you listen to the conversation about login, the experience on the site is going to be exactly the same. Conway's Law.
Now, we say it again, this is coming back to theory versus practice, right? So in theory, we say, well, fix Conway's Law, you fix the problem. But that doesn't really, it's not as easy, I guess, easily done. Or kind of, let's go back to that and say, it's probably easier said than done, right? That's the problem. Let's kind of, I want to hone in on that a little bit, because I think that's where one of the things that I know VPs or head of engineering are coming back and saying, well, I got my deliverables. I got my
You can't
timelines.
expect 100 different development teams to all work together. They're going to have segregation.
We have to have segregation. The question then becomes, but is it segregated based on, I'm going to say, a team, or is it segregated based on domain? And I think that's the conversation around Conway's Law.
Right.
If we said, hey, I got a team, it's a completely different conversation than saying I have a domain. If I had a team, that means I potentially have many teams partaking or creating their own domain or duplicating the domain.
Multiplication.
See how this starts to come together, right? Versus saying, hey, I got a domain and teams contribute to the domain. This is now bringing up a business domain and allowing teams to mature it.
I can see, I can already see the vocabulary there changing because everybody's talking in the same way. Right. They're working individually, right? And they have their own goals and everything. But because they're talking within their domain, they know where their boundaries are, right? And they know when to go consult someone else. Right. Instead of just being like, hey, they know about that. Go over there and talk to them. Well, why? Who owns what's going on there?
Exactly. So this goes back to actually a very old book that we know about, which is Domain-Driven Design, Eric Evans. So when you think about it from that perspective, there's a ubiquitous language that we're trying to go after. And there's a bounding context that we're trying to go after. So a lot of the organizations talk about it, but then this comes down to execution. So we're not stating new ideas. The idea is here, or the goal here is how can we improve execution? That's really the heart of that multiplication problem.
And when you said those words, I heard every technical leader listening to this say, not my problem. Those are developer speak. Those are developer words. But in fact, that's kind of the inflection point right there, right?
Right.
Both sides, the developer, the engineering side, and the business leadership side have to have a ubiquitous language, have to understand the boundaries of their domains. Right. They absolutely must be on the same page there. And the better they are, the better your systems are going to be and your user experience is going to be. All of that is going to play in together.
Right.
So I guess the key takeaway from today is platform multiplication isn't a technology problem, right? It's an organization problem. Good engineers build the best systems for the circumstances that they're given. And if those circumstances are fragmented, then the systems are going to be fragmented too.
Good engineers are going to engineer. And really good ones, they're going to probably sometimes over-engineer. So the idea here is that it's not a tools problem. It's not like, it's Node, it's Go, for example. It's not more policies, because that could technically really hinder you. You have to really address your execution problem.
Right.
What's your execution like? How are you organized around execution? Take a look at that first. What's your stack look like? What's your, what we call modern delivery stack? What does that look like? Address that, and I'm sure it'll make a big impact.
Which brings us perfectly to our next episode, Conway's Law in Action. We'll explore how your team structure literally drives your system architecture, often in ways that you don't expect. If you want to fix the platform multiplication, you need to understand Conway's Law first. Thanks for listening to Going to Production. If you haven't, please consider subscribing to our podcast, and we'll see you on the next one.